Rob, welcome back. It's going really well again in the Hedera space.
Another great week, a bit choppier than the previous one, but it's always good to be an HBAR bearer.
Hey, when it comes to markets, you need these pullbacks. You need to set up that support so we can go for the next leg up. So this is
Yep.
really healthy. This pullback. I know you don't generally talk about markets, but it's good to see these pullbacks. Even on the pullbacks, it seems like HBAR is outperforming a lot of our competition out there. So I'm happy with what I'm seeing.
Yeah, where we sat today while we're recording, we're still at number 17 in CMC. If you rate that as a good assessment of Hedera's performance, then I think we're in a good place.
I do. That's the scoreboard I pay attention to.
Yeah.
But Rob, we have a fair amount of questions here today. We're going to have to go a little bit rapid fire
Cool.
because we already have tons of content going on this week, but we'll jump into them. So the first one comes from HBAR $10 who says, Rob, Hedera has very cheap fees, but do enterprises still feel the public mainnet is too expensive for large scale use cases that will be doing tens of billions of transactions?
It's a really good question, especially in the light of the use case around Atma. I suspect that was the thing that kind of triggered the question. Ultimately, when you're running a business, it's the commerciality of the service or product you're offering that you need to focus on. And so the operating costs of building and operating that service or that product is everything to the business. It's revenue and margin. So although the question suggests that at high scale it still might be too costly to operate these high volume use cases on Hedera, I mean it's simply not the case. That just means that the product market fit hadn't been found. And so, as long as there's margin, as long as the commercials are correct, the commercial modeling is correct, then there's no reason to think that billions of transactions wouldn't be commercially viable. Equally, if you get that wrong, if you get your commerciality wrong, your pricing wrong, the product market fit it simply isn't there, then it doesn't matter whether you're doing billions or tens of transactions a second. You're not going to be a successful business. So what Hedera offers is a platform that allows for huge scale, but the solutions that built on it, you still have to go back to core principles of business building and operating, just with the additional benefit of having this amazing platform underneath you.
Now, Rob, just to put a finer point on that, when you say the commercial viability, if you have a use case that's doing transactions and they're paying either 1/100th of a cent or 1/10th of a cent, depending on what service they're using, as long as they're making a percentage above that, they're getting that much more value out of it.
Sure.
It's still going to be viable no matter what the scale is, right?
Yeah, sure. So, we both love the micropayments use case. If I were to operate a use case that needed micropayments at 1 cent that I could charge 1.5 cents for, and I was using an architecture that used the Hedera token service and doing transfers at 1/10 of a cent, there is margin. There's plenty of margin there. If I was just charging zero point 0.2, I could only charge 0.2 of a cent per transaction, and my underlying costs were 0.1, and then I had all the other business expenses on top to operate it. It would be marginal or negative in terms of revenue. So you do have to get the commercials of the business right, and that I use that example because it's one that's very close to my heart. And if I can only charge zero point 0.2 of a cent for a transaction for whatever use case that might be, then I might not use HTS, but Hedera offers HCS. So I change my architecture in order that I use the 100th of a cent price point or cost point for those transactions within that use case. Hedera does give lots of optionality around the services because of the way it's built, but one has to architect a solution that is appropriate for the product, and the product has to find market fit too. So all of these things need to be considered. It's not just about the technology.
Understood. All right. So the next one comes from skd.hedera, who says, question for Rob. When version 1.0, how vital is it to get to V1 of Hedera mainnet for institutional and governmental adoption? Are there tech readiness levels associated with the Hedera DLT? Thank you both for all you do. I enjoy the show each and every week.
It's a very good question. I have spoken to the Hashgraph team about this. This is something that TechCom really, from time to time, deliberates upon. I mean, there are different definitions of what out of beta or version 1 means. It could be technical. So the answer is that we don't have a very clear definition of what coming out of beta and being V1 is. Some believe that the HIRO milestone should have been the point at which we were out of beta. I personally think that it's probably the point at where we can issue community nodes, because that means we're kind of complete in terms of all the tooling, and the need to support nodes is far lessened. Or it might be a far more technical definition in terms of a point on the roadmap. I'm not sure it's actually really that important. I think that there will be a determination in the fairly near future what that looks like, and if there's a need to switch to V1, then we will, and as is normally the case, TechCom will deliberate on it. It would make a recommendation to the Governing Council, and it will either be voted on if it needs a vote. I suspect it doesn't, or just general agreement that we're now in V1. But as usual, it would probably come down to TechCom and the chairs of TechCom to lead that. The version numbering of HIRO is very different, I believe. There are different definitions that we have considered. So TechCom believes that we're in a state where we can be considered version 1. But there's a question about whether, even if the technology is out of beta, is the Hedera network more holistically out of beta? Maybe we need the Governing Council to be filled, or maybe there are roadmap items that still need to be completed to enable the network as a whole to be considered out of beta. HIRO itself is going to start at V1, so the HIRO open source stack will be version numbers above V1, so that might lead to confusion, and that might drive a need for the Hedera instance of HIRO to be considered V1, or be in step. And then there will be proposals for what our network releases look like. I believe that because we do monthly releases, it may not be that we have version numbering that's aligned. So, I mean, there's lots of reasons for us to be considered V1, but we need to make sure that we're in sync across these very different parts of the ecosystem, whether it be the network as a whole, the technology stack. If we talk about just the mainnet or mainnets and mirror nodes, we've got block nodes coming very soon as well, community nodes. What versions do they kind of align with? And then, of course, the network releases as well. It's not as simple as just saying we're out of beta. It's the short answer of that very long-winded answer.
Sounds good. I like your idea of making community nodes when we get to that point, that being a good dividing line. But you said there's a lot more that goes into it.
I mean, if you look at the roadmap, there's a lot going on, right? So it's very difficult to draw a line because there's all these overlapping initiatives and activities that kind of lead towards key milestones in the future. And the provision of block nodes and the node management tooling is necessary for community nodes, but we've also got sharding, which is required state proofs. We've got now Hashspheres, which are going to be driving some of the engineering effort as well in terms of support. So it's all overlapping, and it's very difficult to draw a line across them all and say that's V1. It's more of a continuum than that. But community nodes for me, and that's just a personal view, it's not a TechCom view, feels like it would be the right point to consider ourselves fully out of beta.
Sounds good. All right, so Bitcoin Conspiracy Theory asks, can Rob address or speculate on the SpaceX Hedera partnership mentioned in the NoviqTech report and how he thinks the community should react to it? Now, there has been some discussion about this. We're pretty sure, at least from my perspective, it looks like they were just talking about the fact that CLSQ and YSAT are leveraging SpaceX to get their satellites into space. And of course, we know that there's a relationship there between Carlos and Elon Musk. But Rob, I know that you're following NoviqTech fairly closely. I don't know, did you see this when it was posted by Jen Finn?
I did, yes, I saw it. Yeah. So NoviqTech, they're a Sydney-based company. I know the CEO really well, and they're formerly called Timeless, so they're very well known within the Guardian ecosystem. They're super strong supporters of Hedera. They're also an Australian Stock Exchange listed business, an ASX listed business. So when they make an announcement that potentially market moving, they have to report through the ASX. The kind of market reporting responsibilities that they have to follow. So that's the source of that report. And they were announcing that they were acquiring HBAR and investing in the Hedera network on which they were building. So they have to make that announcement because it's an obligation on them because they're a listed business. Now, some of the notes associated with that report, the bullet points that were kind of highlighted, were kind of background information to give more color, I guess, to the report for those who are reading it in the market, maybe justification or just some kind of background content. And I haven't spoken to them specifically about this, but there is lots and lots of news all the time, as we know, because we talk about it all the time. And they would have drawn on some of the news items, and that's all it is. There was news about CLSQ and WiseKey and their relationship with SpaceX, and it was just put into a single statement within that report. So I don't think that the community should read anything into it whatsoever more than what is stated there. There is no inside information, or there is no alpha there at all. It's just a reflection of what we talk about all the time for an audience that may not have known it, under an obligation to report on the acquiring of that HBAR.
But still exciting that whole thing, everything that's going on there is something to be excited about for the entire
whenever a
community.
piece of these news items gets picked up in these different forums. I did a meetup last night in Sydney, which we sponsored. Really, really well attended. Talking about Hedera, I put a deck together. Every time I seem to have to put a new deck together because I like to talk about the recent things. And it's a really heavily loaded deck, a slide per theme that we're addressing, everything from DPIN all the way through to gaming, Earthlings and Lithos and everything, plus all about burgeoning DeFi ecosystem and Bonzo, and there's news all the time, and the engagement was great because we tend to, in the Web3 space, you kind of go down rabbit holes and you consider chains to be a particular, focused on a particular theme, but we had nearly 60, 70 people in this room sort of going, wow, I didn't know Hedera did gaming. I didn't know they did. Are they really doing DPIN? Or let's talk more about tokenization. And, we were able to have this really broad spectrum. And so some of those people were in that audience, they were there because they'd seen Hedera mentioned in this ASX listed market report or market announcement, and did a bit of digging, and then came along and sort of asked me questions afterwards and told me that was the reason. So seeing Hedera pop up in unexpected places, as we are seeing now after the last few weeks, people are sitting up and taking more attention. We shouldn't worry about the source of those new eyeballs on Hedera. Obviously, we should correct it. It's beholden on us to correct it if it's absolutely wrong. But at this point in the market, all news is good news.
Absolutely. So the next question is also about SpaceX. It comes from Money Be Constant. Love the name, by the way, but they ask, when watch party for the SpaceX launch of Hedera and CLSQ into space? So to start off, CLSQ already has 17 Pico satellites that are up there. The next launch is going to put more up there, and then they're going to do a final. I think they want 100 total to have their full constellation. But this is all around having the ability to do transactional Internet of Things. So they're going to have a token that's going to be that medium of exchange between, all kinds of things, smart cities and autonomous vehicles, smart homes, and on down the line. And the next launch is going to be taking place in late January, I think. And I did talk to Carlos. He is the CEO and co-founder of WiseSat and CLSQ. And he said that this one's going to be from a military base, or it sounded like that, because I wanted to go there in person. So I'm not sure if we're actually going to be able to go there in person and live stream or something like that to it. But of course, hopefully, if they have any kind of coverage, we would love to do a watch party, but we already have Hedera and CLSQ up there in space. We're just adding to it now.
Yeah, it would be amazing, wouldn't it, to even to be there in person as well, just to be on those foldable chairs, miles away, watching the rockets take off. It'd be incredible.
We'll see if we can figure something out. So the next one comes from HBAR, who asks, what does Rob think about seeing DAOs on the governing council while we wait for community nodes? Can he tell us his thoughts, why he thinks it could work or not, and any ideas on what we would need to get it done? Now, Rob, I'm not really sure what he's talking about here. I'm not sure if it's something that you talked about in the past. You've mentioned in the past that you consider the governing council itself almost a DAO, and we could kind of move in that direction. But do you have any further insights?
Yeah, well, I don't think there's a direct correlation between a DAO being on the governing council and community nodes to start with. I mean, those are two separate things entirely. And the governing council is kind of a DAO. We have particular responsibilities, although DAO is a very loose definition. Although DAO-based concepts are maturing, I don't think there's any one definition of what a DAO would be. So saying a DAO would be on the governing council kind of doesn't make too much sense to me at the moment. The governing council is an incorporated business, the LLC, and the 39 members have equal shares of that. So it's not actually a DAO. But when DAOs do form, there are many studies about the most appropriate entity structure that would be necessary for a DAO, because you still need to operate, you still need to be an entity in the real world and recognize as such. So you might be a cooperative, for example, type structure. So if there were a DAO that had a corporate structure that was allowable, like a cooperative, maybe, with sufficient scale or impact to the Web3 space and was beneficial to Hedera, I could envisage something like that being part of the governing council. Now, I don't know by its very nature who would be, the representatives sitting on the governing council of the DAO. I guess the DAO itself would vote for one of its members or two of its members to be the representatives. We vote, the governing council vote on everything. We sign transactions on chain to do things like bringing new nodes on or transferring treasury. So voting is actually a core concept of DAOs. So I mean, they're not too far apart. I could visualize a future where that might happen. But firstly, I know of no DAOs that would make the grade in terms of what we need to join the governing council. And I think we've probably got a few changes to the LLC agreement under which we all kind of operate before that could happen. But it's a really interesting thing to consider, and maybe in the next year or two, there will be DAOs forming that are fit for purpose and will contribute in the right way. Remember, we have to run a node. So how does the DAO would have to run a node? The DAO would have to. I mean, a DAO could vote as a DAO and contribute that one resulting vote into the vote for the governing council. So I mean, all of this is doable, and it would all be done on Hedera. So it's a really interesting kind of thing to think through. And maybe through this next cycle, this 3-year cycle, DAO corporate entities would mature sufficiently for us to consider that. I'll pitch it into MEMCOM next time, and that should put the cat amongst the pigeons.
Well, Rob, you read that one perfectly, because when I first read it, I didn't really know what he was asking, but now that you've answered it, I understand it perfectly. So well done on that one. So the next one we have is from Neosynth, who says, with the integration of Hedera's stablecoins and the MTech CBDC sandbox into the Universal Digital Payments Network, how do you foresee this impacting the adoption of Hedera's technology in mainstream financial systems? What challenges and opportunities does this present for Hedera in the evolving digital payments landscape? Again, right up your alley, Rob.
Yeah, it's an excellent question. The UDPN project was a proof of concept, but UDPN is becoming a very relevant set of organizations, or a network that is contributed to by a number of banks and corporates, and they're still working through their key use cases. They've identified 10 or 11 use cases where they're kind of focusing. Sponsored out of the foundation, the UDPN POC with all those other participants is another good validation point for use of Hedera as kind of financial services infrastructure. We've got the stablecoin studio, we've got the asset tokenization studio, we've got numerous payments type businesses building on it, running proofs of concept left, right, and center, across the whole of the Hedera ecosystem. And like I said, that's just another great validation point. We've got stable coins coming. We've got some stable coins obviously already on the ledger. So I don't know whether there's any follow-up projects. Maybe that's a question for Sabrina at the foundation. But it kind of doesn't really matter because we're getting news every day about new ecosystem integrations, new stable coins, new use cases being built on this, and new networks like UDPN experimenting with and adopting Hedera. And the question also includes MTech. So MTech, the CBDC sandbox, is going from strength to strength. I've lost track of how many countries are using that. I think it's 6 in Africa alone, and there's those in the Caribbean and elsewhere in the world. So, Carmel and her team are really, knocking it out of the park in terms of the CBDC sandbox. And then of course we've got everything that FSCO is doing in the Philippines, their integration with the MasterCard token network or multi-token network, which are deposit tokens. So you've got stable coins, which are privately issued and fiat-backed mostly. You've got deposit tokens, which are claims against banks' balance sheets, so more TradFi, but tokenized TradFi. And then you've got CBDCs at the central bank level. So we cover all the layers as well. And then, of course, we were just talking about, before we started recording, we were talking about interoperability. So we're talking about interoperability between private versions of Hedera, a la Hashspheres, and public Hedera. So, the intention is not to build islands with moats around them. It's to actually have fully interoperable instances of Hedera. And, with this financial services architecture in mind, with CBDCs and then commercial bank deposit token type technology, and then privately issued stable coins, which may or may not be regulated by the bank issuers. One could see our own technology stack kind of mirroring that. So private Hashspheres, for example, for CBDCs, banks operate some kind of hybrid model. Deposit tokens might be on a Hashsphere, and stablecoins might be on Mainnet, and then you've got all the private issuers of stablecoins, probably issued on Mainnet and the public chain. And we've got a solution for all of those, or we will have very, very soon. So it's a very, very exciting time for all of these things to start kind of coming together. And I think the Hashgraph team with the Hashsphere approach is bang on the money, to be honest.
There's so much potential. And we're going to get to Hashspheres here in a couple questions.
Okay.
But the next one comes from Ty Denny, who asks, is there any work being done to get HTS tokens on tier 1 exchanges? Now, from a overall ecosystem perspective, this would fall square in the lap of Elaine Song. She is the head of strategy at the HBAR Foundation. So she would be responsible for that kind of stuff. HBAR listings, USDC listings, Hedera version of USDC listings, and then other HTS tokens. But of course, the individual teams, when it comes to HTS tokens, they're going to be responsible for getting them on as well. Now, most of the trading takes place on our decentralized exchanges. We do have some of our HTS tokens, the Hedera tokens built on Hedera, that do have some representation on centralized exchanges. So Jam comes to mind, Karate Combat's Karate token comes to mind, Galaxy as well. But the questioner is right. We don't have any tier 1 exchanges that have that. Now, my priority would be getting Hedera's version of USDC on those exchanges first, but I do want to see all these HTS tokens get represented as well, because they have some fantastic products out there. Now, HBAR isn't even listed on a couple tier 1 exchanges, Gemini and Kraken. So we certainly want to see that come to fruition first. But I would see, for some reason, I think that I know the reason. There's a good chance that I see Karate getting on Kraken at some point. So we're going to have to get HBAR on there first. But then the reason why I see Kraken is because Kraken is one of the big sponsors. It kind of shocks me that we haven't gotten there, but you have to go step by step. But Rob, do you have anything you want to add to this one?
I think the hardest thing is the first HTS token. So, obviously there is a Hedera native Hedera token service native integration that the exchanges need to make in order to provide the tokens. It's very easy to onboard ERC20, EVM-based, smart contract-based tokens from across all the chains that support it, because the integration is the same, just kind of copy-paste. So an HDS integration requires development effort. That's usually, as you rightly say, funded out of the foundation. That requires the focus of the foundation to work with these exchanges one at a time in priority order, I guess, to do an full HTS integration, probably with a high volume HTS token, such as a Karate or a Galaxy or I don't know, Source or Pack or something that trailblazes for all the other HTS tokens. Because once the integration's made, the others should follow. Of course, there's an application process. There's some kind of vetting mechanism usually in order to bring them on board. But breaking the back of the effort for the first one is the hardest thing. And it's usually, you need it's not just about throwing money at these things. The foundation can't just throw money at it because it doesn't get priority unless it's going to be used, right? So you need a high volume, very popular HTS token, and I think we've got a few of those now, supported by foundation integration money, and then the floodgates should open with the other HTS tokens. But yes, it would be great to see some of our amazing projects with their token economies exposed to the wider space, because then we have no doubt that all that liquidity, all that attention will flow into Hedera and take us to new highs.
So we do have one from Rakesh who just wants to know when step function. Now, of course, we had a step function with @Mayo. We've had a step function down a bit, but one of the things is the background. We used to talk about background, everything that was going on that didn't include @Mayo, but that has come up significantly as well. So, and especially with the additional action we're seeing now with more trading happening on our decentralized exchanges. But Rob, what are your thoughts around this?
Yeah, I assume he means step up function rather than step down.
Sure, that's what we want to see, right?
And I assume he means transactions. I honestly don't think, we'll see step functions in the future as new high volume use cases come on board. But like I've said, a few times now, I think we're at that stage in the cycle where we have so many projects at a similar stage in their, the startup life cycle, where you've found product market fit, you've done all the kind of the low volume but user feedback kind of iterations. There's a growth in the wider space. There's a lot more interest. The network effect is happening in terms of bringing people in and using different applications, different projects at the same time. You go from Source to Bonzo to Source Swap to Bonzo to Hashpack to Earthlings to Karate Combat. So you're kind of staying in the ecosystem now. Your HBAR is the numeraire underneath all of that, but you've got the tokens on top, and you're finding your own thing within your own tribes within the Hedera ecosystem. So all these projects are at similar stages of development, and they're all about to go through this inflection point as more people come in and more people use all of the things. So it's going to be a step. It's going to be a ramp up rather than a step up, I think, as all of these kind of come up together. We'll have these steps as the bigger use cases come on board, but actually, I think there's going to be a let's call it a parabolic curve of growth rather than a step function. I think we're beyond the steps. We're it's the pyramid of all those little steps, but you zoom out and you just see the upward trajectory.
Well, one of the things that I've been thinking about more lately is it's not just adding additional use cases, but every single one of those use cases is going to have an adoption curve where it just gets used more and more, whether it's SkewX or Earthlings with gaming, or, we just go down the line. Now we can see it with Karate Combat. They have 1,500 when they had their first up-only gaming event that slowly went up. Now it's at over 100,000, 120,000. So we see it with that because they're putting that on their website on a regular basis. But all of these use cases are going to have that same curve. So not only are we going to be adding additional use cases, but we're also going to have each one of those individual use cases scaling themselves.
Yeah, and we still talk about step function, but that's just for one metric, right? The old metric that we focused on of TPS will and should not be the only metric that we look at through this next year or two. Through CorpCom, we're looking at new metrics to better represent the health and growth of the ecosystem. And so one could imagine revenue being another curve that we should be looking at, revenue growth over time, which in itself will hide, like TPS does, but hide sub-metrics around which of the services are being utilized in order to contribute to that growth. And I suspect, the growth of our DeFi ecosystem will drive, smart contract-based revenue, which is some of the highest that we can attain. And token service and a consensus service will balance out. So, I think that's going to be interesting as well, the analytics around these other different metrics. And I know Brady comes on and talks in your new DeFi corner with a dashboard of really relevant new metrics, all of which I think are super important to have an eye on. But I like to see these things plotted over time rather than points of, because you need to see its relevance within context. So the growth of the network will be represented across a number of different metrics, which aren't just the step function of the old TPS world.
Agreed. Now we're going to move back to those Hashspheres. So Troy BR 7957 says, question for Rob. Lehman talked this past week regarding the private Hashspheres. Do the transactions inside, and that's I think the key point here, inside the private network require HBAR?
My understanding at the moment is no. A Hashsphere is a special purpose network, which I'm not sure it's been determined yet how it will be anchored. So my understanding is that within the Hashsphere itself, the owner of that Hashsphere can determine whether or not they need, a token to kind of operate within it. Where it's anchored into the mainnet, and it'll be anchored for maybe for security or for transactional logging or for some other purpose. Of course, it'll need HBAR to make those transactions, so that the Hashsphere will can operate on its own, but it'll be anchored dependent on how it's been set up or configured. But I think the thinking now is that that's fairly limited. Walled gardens don't actually work very well. And through history, the walled gardens of the early internet, the walled gardens of the mobile payment networks, only the ecosystems only flourish when the walls are broken down and you get interoperability kind of across those networks. So the thinking is definitely that Hashspheres operate in kind of coordination and collaboration with the other instances of Hedera, which might be sphere to sphere via a underlying layer, which is the mainnet. It might be mainnet liquidity flowing into a Hashsphere for some kind of privacy-based reason and then flowing out again. It might be an enterprise, for example, using a Hashsphere as a first step on its route to full Web3 implementation. So it's a kind of a safe space to operate and discover which elements of that new kind of business model need to be retained as private and which can be made public or operated on the public network. Or it might be the other way around. You may have a business that wants to operate an entirely new business model and wants liquidity and attention coming in from the mainnet into its Hashsphere to operate and then flowing out again. So there's all sorts of ways that Hashspheres can operate in collaboration with other entities within the Hedera ecosystem, and of course outside the ecosystem. I imagine that there might be instances of a Hashsphere that has Hedera on one side and maybe a bridge, to the rest of the Web3 space. Again, we can't be an island, building a wall around Hedera is still a walled garden, right? So we still need the integration and interaction and interoperability with other parts of the Web3 space, because I think we're better than the others. So that will be a natural, pull of liquidity and usage, into our space. But we can't pull that in unless we've got the bridges.
And Lehman is super focused on this. He's been focused on it from the beginning, of course, shared worlds and all that kind of stuff. And I loved what Richard said. Now, I'm not sure if I'm going to put that before or after this segment, but how all of this is driving all of this as far as the Hashspheres are driving network effects, and that's just going to have impacts on Hedera just across the board.
Well, I'm sorry, just to finish on that. I mean, there's this holy trinity that we have now. The holy trinity in my mind is we've got the Hedera mainnet, going great guns, growing, people building on it, more and more attention by the day. As I said earlier, the meetup last night, the range of different projects building across every kind of sector that you could think of on Hedera. Is just drawing more and more attention in, and people are going down the rabbit hole and getting stuck, like we were, 7 years ago. We just got stuck because you're amazed by the range and potential of what we found, and that all the new people are now finding that. I can't find one that isn't amazed by what has been created and the potential of what it presents. So we've got the mainnet, first part of the Holy Trinity. Then we've got Hyro, so we've got the fully open source project, which enables full open source community interaction, which will draw in the tens of millions of the world's developers who are familiar with interacting with open source. So it'll be their first contact with, many of them, first contact with distributed ledger technology, because they operate through the Linux Foundation and open source, and we're the only layer one in this new decentralized trust project. So that's the second part of the Holy Trinity. And then for enterprise that are a little bit timid about going all in on the Web3 space, we've got this private version, which is fully integrated with the other two, in order to test the water or stay in that space but still contribute, or move through it and build architectures in the future that are hybrids of all of those. So we are in such a good place now. I know it's by design, and I know we've talked about it for years, but talk is cheap, right? We've actually demonstrated and delivered it over the last year or two, and kudos to everyone in the Hedera ecosystem that's participated. 2025 is going to be an amazing year.
Exciting times. All right, so the next one comes from OakBZ, who asks, can you ask Rob or Richard if Hashgraph has chosen a NIST quantum-proof signature? Now, I did get a reply from Richard, and he said, we've been watching this space closely for years. This blog is a good one to share, and we'll drop that link down in the description for anybody that wants to take a deep dive. He goes on to say, NIST is still working on post-quantum signing algorithms, and we're watching their work. So, Rob, regardless, it sounds like Richard is all over this, and Hedera is going to be on the cutting edge when it comes to this.
Yeah. I mean, I've got nothing more to say. It's Richard is exactly the right man to ask, and not me.
Well, we got the feedback, and you can check out that blog if you want to do a deep dive. So next up, we have Pete Taylor, and he's a bit salty. He says, how come Elon Musk has launched 300 rockets in the same time as Hedera has built a 1 TPS use case? Not exactly accurate, but we can cover that here in a second. And then he goes on to say, and why does my local car wash make more profit than Hedera?
I think this is one of our backlog questions. So I wonder if Pete is as salty now as when he wrote the question a few weeks ago. We'll take the question at face value, right? So we talk about TPS a lot. We talked earlier about the point at which we are in this cycle. We're seeing TPS growth, organic TPS growth right now. It's just the natural order of things. Having TPS on other networks is not the same as TPS on Hedera. I mean, the TPS on Hedera are all real-world transactions based on real-world use cases and projects, and real users using those applications on Hedera. And our interactions are not I don't think our interactions are bot-based or wash trades or all of the things that happen on other networks. And it takes a lot, for even one TPS. There's quite a lot of interactions, sustained, and we've got far more than that. So yes, we've had the luxury of the ATMA proof of concept, if you like, for 2,000 to 3,000 transactions a second, and we all reveled in that. But I have no doubt we'll be back up there when we need to. But I think the key thing here, and we talked about metrics and more relevant metrics. It's not ignoring the fact that the TPS is lower than it was, but there are more relevant metrics, and I personally think revenue is a really key one. But the range of projects, as I said earlier, all those amazing projects, and I'm only talking about this so much now is because I spent a lot of time yesterday in advance of the meetup putting a presentation together to talk about all of these things. And I was inspired by a lot of the content that you've put out because you kind of track a lot of them, but you don't track them all. And so my Googling reminded me of the likes of Zenny, for example, or all of the games, Slime World, or what we're doing, basically new announcements every single day, all of which I was trying to bring into this deck, and there was far more than I could even deliver. I mean, Voltic, we just talked to last week, has just launched high value designer goods on chain. You've got the amazing Cast Capital. So I mean, there's some great stuff, and then there's all the sustainability projects. So I'm just really, really, really bullish on the ecosystem because TPS is not the be all and end all. It's the builders who have come to Hedera for the right reasons and are staying and building. Many of them without foundation support, without grants. They're doing it with their own funds. They're doing it, with their own sweat, and are still here. The early ones have been, hitting all the barriers that you do as a startup founder with, brand new emerging tech, and the frustrations. And we haven't. We've lost some over the years, but we haven't lost them all, and many come on a daily basis. So, I'm super bullish about the builders, not the TPS necessarily.
Couldn't be more bullish on my side. So we have one last question here, Rob. It comes from HBAR 2100, who asks, have the Hedera team celebrated over a Hawkstone beer yet? And for anybody that doesn't know, Hawkstone, I think they're out of the UK, and they have a symbol on their beer that looks an awful lot like the Hedera symbol, but we've kind of taken them under our wing or adopted them ourselves and saying that's the official beer of Hedera. I haven't had one myself yet, Rob. Have you had one?
I haven't. I'm just Googling them right now. So Hawkstone is made by a British celebrity. Many people may have heard of Jeremy Clarkson. So Jeremy Clarkson has been around in the British space as a host of a program called Top Gear, which is like a petrol head's mecca, and has a very sardonic approach to life. Is probably to the right of Genghis Khan in terms of some of his beliefs. But he has a farm. He has a very big farm in the UK, and is now on, I think, Amazon Prime with a program called Clarkson's Farm, which is great entertainment, because he's got a Lamborghini tractor and gets everything wrong. But Hawkstone beer is his brew. And yes, the H in Hawkstone is the Hedera capital H symbol. Maybe the Hedera legal team haven't caught on to this yet and are going to go after him. But if anyone in the UK wants to buy a slab of Hawkstone and hold it back for me when we next come to London, I'll be delighted to drink it with them.
I think they should just give them official permission to use it. Rob, we haven't had a beer yet, so hopefully when we eventually do meet, we haven't met in person. When we do meet, we can share a Hawkstone together. But Rob, I just realized that I want to expand Shark Bites a little bit. I haven't told you this. I thought about it while we were going through all these questions, but I'll tell you about it once we get off camera. Okay. If anybody has any questions for Rob, go ahead and drop those down in the comment. Rob, Please come back next week. We're having a blast doing this, and things are only heating up.
I'll be here. It'll be the pre-Christmas one next week, and then maybe the New Year one with our roundup with Zepsi. Something to look forward to.